Firing Matt Eberflus didn't make the Chicago Bears any better against the San Francisco 49ers. So does that mean the bigger issue here is about the roster talent, even more than just the coaching?
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use our promo code LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. On the show today, I want to get at this question of how talented this Bears roster actually is, and maybe they're not as good, the players themselves, as maybe we thought they were coming into this season, and what that then means for general manager Ryan Poles and the dynamic between roster talent and coaching, and how those relationships aren't always clear and obvious here. So we'll kind of look at where the talent issue exists, how that plays into the coaching issues, and how we try and piece together, okay, what exactly is wrong with this Bears team right now, which is, spoiler alert, like everything is kind of what it feels like at this moment here. But it's been kind of at the crux of like, okay, you fired Eberflus and things didn't get better, so does that mean, oh, actually, it's the players that are definitely the problem there? And I think there's something to that. I think it's definitely fair to say this roster, as it's constructed now, is not as good as we thought it would be on paper. Right? I think we knew that there were questions about the offensive line, where that's sort of the position that even when the team was playing well, we still kind of all agree that it felt a little neglected and that Ryan Poles hadn't done enough on the offensive line. The interior kind of slapped together younger players at the tackle spots. It's just a group that has been consistently underachieving, but it was a little bit more of an expected underachievement. We didn't come into the season thinking this offensive line was going to be elite. We thought maybe they'd be better than they were, but not like they haven't been leaps and bounds worse than we thought they would be. But I think the talent issue questions come where things have been a little bit more disappointing or a little bit more unexpected in that regard, where it's like, okay, are the players that you think are good on this roster, are they truly good enough, or are they just kind of okay? You know, like is DJ Moore truly a game-changing difference maker, number one wide receiver, or is he good but not great? You know, is Cole Kmet a game-changing difference maker tight end, or is he good but not great and will drop a 2-point conversion every once in a while? You know, like Keenan Allen, maybe a little bit older than we thought he might be. Is DeAndre Swift, you know, a game-changing playmaking running back, or is he good but not great? Because, you know, all three of those guys, at least Moore, Kmet, and DeAndre Swift, you're paying them not top dollar, but you're paying them high-end money. And I think you're paying them the kind of money where, you know, if you're investing that much of your salary cap into those players, you need them to not just be good, but to be great, to be elite at their position. Doesn't mean they have to be, you know, top 3 or even maybe necessarily top 5, but like they have to be consistently, you know, top 10 caliber players at their positions. And I'm not sure that over the course of the year that's played out exactly that way. And then you can already sort of hear but like, isn't that about coaching? And we'll get into coaching in a second, but it starts to be an issue when you see it at multiple players with key salaries here. Like, it's one thing with young players, right? You have a certain patience and understanding that there's going to be ups and downs along their careers. But veteran players eventually start to settle in as who they are. They're either a great player or they're not. And it's not necessarily like, you know, 7, 8, 9 years into a career does a player all of a sudden take that big leap forward. Usually by, 5 or 6, we kind of know exactly who they are. Like, you think about this Bears defense. Like, who are the players on defense that are like consistently reliable, really good to great players? Montez Sweat. I think TJ Edwards is in this category. Jalen Johnson, certainly elite at his position. Kyler Gordon is playing cornerback at a really high level this season. Kevin Byard, maybe. You got 5-ish guys there. But I don't think Tremaine Edmonds has been spectacular this year, and I think he's been inconsistent at times throughout his Bears career and dating back to his Buffalo Bills career, where, again, he's good. I'm not here to say he's not a good player, but is he a great player? Sometimes. Sometimes he's a great player, just like sometimes DJ Moore is a great player, and sometimes Cole Kmet's a great player, and sometimes DeAndre Swift is a great player. But are they great enough? Or is this who they are as players, as veterans at this point in their careers, that, yeah, they're good, but they're not consistently great enough to truly be top-end players? Like, are some of the fundamental pieces on this Bears roster just not good enough? Because again, like on the defensive side of the ball, much like the offensive line, we knew the defensive line had some question marks here. Besides Montez Sweat, we didn't know exactly where the pass rush was going to come from or how consistent that group was going to be. There were younger players that they were counting on, and so we don't have to go in here thinking all of a sudden this defensive line is much worse than we thought it would be, because, okay, we never thought it would be that great. But like on the back end, the cornerback opposite Jalen Johnson, whether it's been Tyreek Stevenson or Terrell Smith rotating in, like, that's been kind of a problem on this defense. They've been too inconsistent at that spot. And certainly the safety spot next to Kevin Byard, not that Jaquan Brisker has been bad, but his extensive injury history now is becoming a problem. He's not a bad player, but his inability to be available is causing this defense significant problems. Like, not that Jonathan Owens was terrible, but he has his ups and downs, and Elijah Hicks has been hurt the last 3 weeks, and he hasn't been all that spectacular either there. And it just, you start to look around and say, okay, maybe you only have a handful of really quality starters on both sides of the ball, and maybe you do have a lot more work to do here. Maybe you do have, you're going to need to make some changes, at least, a couple different spots on defense, and maybe you wonder if offensively, where you might be able to make some more upgrades there. But I don't know. We also didn't necessarily expect this to be a perfectly finished product just yet this year. And I also feel like some of this comes down to how players are being used exactly, and, whether or not this team is putting them in a position to really be successful. Because we have seen some of these players play well, but have we seen players get better? That's one of the real questions here. And also, do you need, you have the, how do I put this? If your team needs, like, how many elite players does your team need, right? If your team needs all 11 guys on defense to be great, then maybe your scheme isn't good enough. Maybe your coaching isn't good enough if you need truly great players at every spot, because every defense has injuries, every team has injuries, and every team has players that are not great. And the elite players are supposed to be able to lift up the players that aren't as elite, and the coaching staff is supposed to be able to do that too. So coaching has to play a role in here, but I also think it's not necessarily easy enough to just say, well, coaching is the only problem. The roster is great because, well, we saw the change in Matt Eberflus not produce that result against the San Francisco 49ers. So we'll look at kind of where this issue falls on coaching more so than the players here, and how we sort of start to then piece this whole problem together next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at IceShakers. I know you're like me and your holiday shopping list is still a work in progress. And if that's the case, I've got the perfect gift idea for the passionate sports fan in your life. Perhaps you heard of IceShakers. IceShakers is now officially licensed with the NFL, NHL, NBA, NCAA, and Major League Baseball, and they'll make the ideal gift. They're created by and used by the Gronkowski brothers. IceShakers has sold over 1 million bottles, changing the game with workout bottles, giving you the gift you've been looking for. Go to IceShaker.com and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL at checkout to save 25% off your order. These are those nice insulated cups that keep your ice frozen and cold for 30 plus hours. And they've got a patented twist-in agitator that breaks up powders, but it's silent when you shake it, unlike those annoying metal balls in the other shaker cups. Like, it's really a nice system in IceShakers. I have one and I really enjoy using it. Order your team-branded bottles today at IceShaker.com and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for 25% off your order. Show your support, whether it's your Bears or any of your other favorite teams, with the best branded workout bottles on the market, IceShakers. Locked On Bears is also brought to you by PrizePicks, the better way to play daily fantasy sports. If you love watching the game, you can take your fun to the next level with the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy at PrizePicks. Whether it's football, basketball, or any of your favorite sports, PrizePicks can make your holidays bigger and brighter. What you need to do is check it out and submit your lineup, because you can win up to 200 times your money on PrizePicks. And this holiday season, they're giving away over $30 million in rewards during Picksmas, and they're offering 2 free picks in December. When your picks hit, PrizePicks makes it super easy to cash out, and you can get your money in as fast as 15 minutes. So whether you want to pick more or less on Caleb Williams' passing yards or DeAndre Swift's rushing yards, it's a lot of fun to play at PrizePicks. Download the PrizePicks app today and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly with your first $5 lineup. That's right, an instant $50 when you play just $5 at PrizePicks. Run your game. So, yes, talent might be a problem. The Bears always need to get better on the roster, but every team always needs a better roster, right? I mean, no team is perfect. Every team has holes and spots where it's like, man, this player's not playing well enough. They need to upgrade at these spots, and then the team will be good enough, right? But that's every team. But not every team is on a, 6-game losing streak? Because it's up to 7 now. I'm losing track of all the losing at this point in the process. But not every team is 4-9. Not every team is spiraling in free fall, and it is indeed a 7-game losing streak. So it doesn't feel like it's just a talent issue, because clearly the Bears have better talent than some of the other 4-win football teams, and certainly the 3-win football. I mean, they're much more talented than the 3-10 Patriots, the 3-10 Jets, the 3-10 Cleveland Browns, the 3-10 Jacksonville Jaguars. The Bears are the only 4-win team right now, but you get the point, right? Like, clearly, if you just look at the rosters on paper, the Bears have holes. They do not have as many holes as the Jacksonville Jaguars, as the Carolina Panthers, etc. This is a better talented football team than those teams. So then we come back to coaching. But the problem is, firing your head coach didn't solve all the problems. So maybe the coaching problems then go a little bit deeper than just Matt Eberflus here. Or maybe the remaining coaching staff still needs more than one game to kind of dig out from the issues that happened with Eberflus, manning the ship and calling the shots at the helm there. Because I think what stands out to me is, like, we talked about guys that are good and not necessarily elite all the time, but we've seen pretty much every player on this Bears roster, but especially the veteran players, like the guys that we might have some questions about. We have seen them play very, very well sometimes. We've seen DJ Moore have huge games. We've seen Cole Kmet have huge games. We've even seen DeAndre Swift have a couple of huge games. Tremaine Edmonds has had some really big games. But we don't see it all the time. And to me, it feels like, okay, if you have this player who's a veteran, again, young players, you kind of understand there's some volatility there. But if you have a veteran player who is capable of playing at a really high level and having elite performances, then it's not a question of whether they have that in them. It's a question of getting that out of them more consistently. And is that not the textbook dictionary definition of what coaching is then? Like, isn't it up to the coaches to put the players in the best position to be successful and help them play at their absolute best? And it's not to say that, like, even great players have off games, and it's not that these players have to be great every single week, but we shouldn't see these caliber of players have this kind of mixed bag sometimes. You should be able to whether it's a motivation issue or a technique issue, whatever it is, like, these are veteran players, right? You're not teaching Tremaine Edmonds how to play linebacker. You're not teaching DeAndre Swift how to play running back. You might, you're always sharpening your game and looking for different ways to improve and do better, but like, this is not an issue of like the fundamentals have to be better. The way maybe someone like Tyreek Stevenson needs a little bit more of that style of coaching. This is about like, hey, Tremaine Edmonds, hey, DeAndre Swift, I know, like if I'm the coach here, I know you know how to do this at a really, really high level. So what do we need to do to get you to do that? Again, is it a focus thing? Is it an energy thing? Is it a motivation thing? Like, how can you tap into that player to make them right all the time? Or is it a scheme thing, right? I was okay, we're asking you to do things too often that take you out of the best position, right? Like that's, again, best position to be successful type situation. Because like, I come back to what we started talking about at the end there is like, it feels like with the talent that the Bears have on this roster, like your scheme on offense, your play calling, your systems on offense and defense shouldn't require everyone to be great. We see good coaches on other teams have a lot of success with more injuries and being able to plug in backups and other players even right off the street and get more out of a player on that team than previous teams with that player were getting out of that player. You don't have to look far around the division. I think about the Green Bay Packers on offense. And Lord knows I don't want to sit here today and say nice things about the Green Bay Packers. But when you think about like the wide receivers and even the tight ends, although the young guys there are playing better, but like that is not a distinctly talented group of pass catchers in that offense. Like, yes, Romeo Doubs and Christian Watson and Jalen Reed or whatever, like, yeah, they're having decent seasons, but like when you think about just like purely the talent there, they're the second round picks, but like these are not elite playmakers the way that we should expect guys like DJ Moore and Keenan Allen to be. And yet the Packers find ways to get more out of those receivers. And I think perfect example last year, they signed Bo Melton off the street from the Seattle Seahawks. And Bo Melton by no means has been some sort of like superstar since he joined the Green Bay Packers. And he's had a little bit of a slower season so far this year. But like last year, he comes in late in that year and has 100 yards against the Minnesota Vikings and 62 yards in the final game against the Chicago Bears. And it was like, oh, they just found this guy off the street and turned him into a good player. Again, not an elite player, but like scheme and play calling and putting guys in a position to be successful and like proper coaching can make lesser players into better players than they are. So then you can also take good players and make them into great players. I think the same thing when you look at like the Detroit Lions defense this year under Aaron Glenn, who Aaron Glenn has taken a lot of heat over the years in Detroit, but you look at that defense this year, they've got so many injuries across the board. They're missing like most of their defensive line. Brian Branch is hurt now. Their linebackers really aren't that great either. They've got a couple of good safeties and they got a good corner or two, but like that's about it. And they're a top 5 defense in the NFL this year. Like, yeah, okay, maybe some of these players are better than we give them credit for, and it just turns out are better players. But a lot of it feels like coaching and, again, scheme, putting guys in position to be successful, finding what they do well, and empowering them to do it. And it just doesn't feel like the Bears have done a good enough job of that. And we haven't seen the Bears do a good enough job of, like, developing players. Who on this Bears roster right now is better this year than they were last year? Kyler Gordon, probably. I don't know, maybe Darnell Wright, maybe Braxton Jones, but like not a lot of names jump out at you. Gervon Dexter, I shouldn't be so quick to jump. Gervon Dexter is definitely shown some real improvement up front on the defensive line, but like Stevenson hasn't really gotten much better. The interior of your O-line hasn't, not much difference there. I don't think we've seen Roschon Johnson take any kind of jump. Like, are the Bears making their players better, or are the players just not that good? I mean, that again, this sort of the chicken and the egg type of debate here. And so I think where that leaves us is that the answer is both, right? The roster needs to be better, but also the coaching staff needs to be better. And so I kind of want to take a look at how these things interplay and where that then leaves Ryan Poles in all of this as the general manager who's in charge of not only building the roster, but also now picking a new coaching staff. That's next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Whether you want to bet on, the Bears this week against the Minnesota Vikings, certainly maybe not the direction I would go, but hey, I guess you could bet on the Vikings if you really wanted to just try and make the best pick for you. The odds over on FanDuel right now for Bears-Vikings on Monday Night Football is Bears +7 as 7-point underdogs on the road. The money line is Bears +245 straight up, or the over-under is set at 44.5 points. Bet on any of those, or you can place live bets all in the same place where you place your bets in the FanDuel Sportsbook app. A $5 bet that you hit is going to give you an extra $150 in bonus bets on top of your other winnings. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So, sure, there's probably some talent issues on this Bears roster, and there's probably some coaching issues on this Bears roster. So, it's not to say that, they didn't do the right thing by firing Matt Eberflus. Yes, that was necessary, even if it didn't fix all of the problems right away. But I think you also need more talent, and you need to coach the talent that you have better and coach the new talent that you bring in better and get more out of these positions. That you need to, yes, get better players on the offensive line. And, if Keenan Allen walks away, you're going to need more talent at receiver. And certainly Gerald Everett's been a disappointment at tight end. Maybe you need more talent there at tight end, but certainly on the offensive line. The defensive line is going to need more talent. Maybe you need an upgrade at the cornerback spot, or, however you want to figure out. There's going to be spots where you need to upgrade this roster this year. But you're also going to need your next coaching staff to come in and get more out of Tyreek Stevenson, get more out of Tremaine Edmonds, get more out of Darnell Wright, and get more out of Braxton Jones, and whoever your center and right guard are going to be, right? You also need coaches to come in and get more out of the players that Ryan Poles does bring in. Because, again, these guys that I'm naming, they're not bad players. There aren't a lot of, bad players in the lineup for the Bears. You can maybe argue Byron Coward on the defensive line is probably not a starting caliber player because he's filling in for injury. Maybe Coleman Shelton, but he's been better in recent weeks. Matt Pryor in recent weeks. Those are probably your biggest weak points, and that's what you're going to look out to replace in free agency in the draft this offseason. But, in theory, you shouldn't need to replace Tyreek Stevenson. You should be able to just coach these guys better, right? You shouldn't need to replace somebody like Tremaine Edmonds, who, again, is not having a bad year at all. You just need to get them to play better by coaching them to play better. You don't need to replace Darnell Wright, certainly. Just coach them up to play better. These are talented players. Just get more of the talent out of them with the right coaches. But I think one of the things that kind of spurred this for me when I think about Ryan Poles in this conversation, which, again, his ability to pick coaches is a different skill set than his ability to put talent on this roster. But somebody tweeted something along the lines that, and again, I'm not intentionally not naming who tweeted this. I actually couldn't find the tweet. I don't remember exactly. It was one of the Bears media sphere blogger people, and I'm not trying to call them out specifically. It's just a point of conversation. But somebody was saying that Ryan Poles, I think the phrase they use, Ryan Pace, the previous general manager, undoubtedly built a better roster than what Ryan Poles is. Because Ryan Pace built, that 12-4 Bears team in 2018, went to the playoffs with Matt Nagy. Ryan Pace clearly had built a better roster. And yeah, the salary cap was getting to be trouble, but that's not a real concern in the NFL. You can keep pushing the money around. So Ryan Pace was the better GM there. And I'm not necessarily here to go super deep into the debate there, but I think the point I want to make when we think about Ryan Poles and this roster is I think we're getting a little bit too ahead of ourselves collectively about hey, Ryan Poles, why isn't this team better? What are you waiting for? Let's go. You're running out of time. This team needs to be better. And I think we need to slow down just a little bit on the timeline and expectations here. Because when I think back to Ryan Pace, when he took over the Bears job, that was in 2015. So they went 2015, 2016, 2017. 2018 was the first year they were any good because they had 3 bad years, then fired their head coach and had a young quarterback in his second season when they had that really good year. Where's Ryan Poles right now? Let's see. 3 bad years, fired his head coach, young quarterback entering a second season. It's funny how that works, isn't it? Like, that's not to say that's a guarantee that Ryan Poles is going to have some great year next year, but like, if we want to do the Ryan Poles versus Ryan Pace comparison, the Bears were bad for 3 years with Pace and John Fox, and they fired that coach because it was the wrong coach. And then the GM got to pick his own coach, and not that Nagy was a great pick, but he turned out to not be a great pick, but still was doing better than a lot of other Bears coaches we've seen in recent years, and took them to the playoffs and won the division and all that stuff. Like, they were a really fun, good team for at least a year there. And so, like, that's where I feel like I'm not here to say, oh, Ryan Poles has been great and we should all have perfect faith in his job as the general manager. No, but I also think we should understand that, well, 3 years going into 4 years feels like a long time, and we had higher expectations. They've definitely underachieved this year. In the grand scheme of building a football franchise, it's not that long. And when we think about how his whole first year was just tearing down, there was no building up. He really lost that whole first year. He's only really been building up this Bears roster for 2 years now. That's not a lot of time to take a bottom of the NFL team and make them into a Super Bowl contender. It takes a long time to build up a roster. And again, I'm not saying that Ryan Poles is going to get this team there or not. I mean, I still think it's worth, I think he has earned the right to keep working on this project. I don't think he's failed so horribly that he needs to be fired, but I don't think he's clearly not been so successful that he's clearly the guy. I just think the jury should still be a little bit more out, because entering this season, like, I'm trying not to like have the perfect, hindsight's 2020 and gaslight ourselves here, but like, we knew coming into this year, we talked about it all offseason, the playoffs were the goal, but this year was not going to be the year that the Bears were supposed to make the big jump, right? Rookie quarterback, new offensive coordinator. We knew heading into this season there would be some bumps along the way and that this team was not going to be at its peak yet this year. Obviously, it's been much worse than we thought they would be, but it was really going to be, next year and the year after. Year 2 with Caleb Williams, year 3 with Caleb Williams is when we were going to expect more and think, okay, that's when you really got to be a playoff team and really got to be making that big push in that sort of Super Bowl window. And while it feels like right now we're farther away from that Super Bowl window than we were 6 months ago, it's still worth noting that, hey, like making a playoff run this year was always going to be extra. The sort of midline expectations for this year was like, get to be above 500 and be competitive. And if you make the playoffs, great. But, 8-9, 9-8 was kind of where we were headed. And obviously we're well below that, but it's not like this was the year where they had to win 11 games and go on a Super Bowl run. Like, we were always going to be a step or two behind that this year. And now I know we're 5 or 6 steps behind that now, but it's not like this was the year where Ryan Poles' roster should be judged on Super Bowl or not. This was always supposed to be a stepping stone year. And it wasn't a step in the right direction, but it doesn't mean that their window's closed and all right, darn, got to blow everything up because you just can't do it anymore. The roster is just toast and everything's terrible. Not quite that easy. So, like, it's hard to want to give Ryan Poles more patience and more time. I'm not saying you have to have blind faith in everything he's going to do, but, like, this stuff takes time for him, and it starts with getting the right coaching staff. And if you can get the right coaching staff, that can make a lot of your talent issues seem like less of an issue, and all of a sudden you're back in the playoff conversation and that much closer to real contention here. So I know that's kind of far off, and there's still 4 more games this season where we're not sure how great it's going to go, but you can be sure we're going to get you ready for this Bears-Vikings game all week long here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you're looking for your second listen, check out this morning's episode of Locked On NFL. I co-hosted with Tyler Rowland. We talked about dark horse contenders in the NFC and AFC, as well as the Monday Night Football game between the Dallas Cowboys and the Cincinnati Bengals. So go check out that podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network for your second listen. Come on back and make Locked On Bears your first listen again tomorrow for another opportunity to bear down.